I think there's always a big wonder before you figure out that you're neurodivergent of like, is everyone finding it this difficult or is it just me?
Ellie Middleton is back.
Autistic ADHDer, author and TEDx speaker.
And a passionate activist for the ADHD community.
With a following of over 300,000 people.
When everyone says like, oh, school's the best time in your life, and you're like, well, if this is as good as it gets, then I don't really want to go any further, to be honest, because this is awful. My probably survival mechanism in masking was like, oh, well, if I just become friends with the popular people, then it'll be fine because everyone will like me then. I will turn myself into the version of myself that I think the people that are around me at this time want me to be.
What's the cost of that, do you think, to someone's self-esteem?
You don't let people in because you don't want anyone to see you in that state. Like, you know, if I am just blunt, rude, and I just stand up and walk away and I don't explain to anyone where I'm going or I'm crying on the way out or whatever it might be, then they're going to think bad of me. So you don't ever show them that side of you.
If there was a book called How to Set Boundaries, what would the first page say on a very basic summary?
I think a good one was...
This episode is dedicated to anyone who has a graveyard of domain names. Just a gentle reminder that tapping the subscribe button helps us here at ADHD Chatter much more than you might realise. As our audience grows, it helps increase our chances of booking even more brilliant guests, full of amazing stories and helpful information. We're so proudly building a community here, and each and every one of our subscribers are valued members of our exclusive ADHD club. The more our community grows, the less we feel alone. So please subscribe. It will help us remind you that you're not broken, that you are and always were enough. Ellie, welcome back.
Thank you.
I think the studio is looking a little bit more chaotic since you were last here.
It is. It's a lot more ADHD energy in here, but I like it.
So these are all the ADHD items of past guests, and yours is under there. Fascinated to hear about it. How have you been since you were last here?
Yeah, I'm good. I was just thinking, I feel like it's the most ADHD thing ever, the amount that we've both done in less than a year since I was last here. Yeah, it's been a busy year. It's been, I feel like I've been reflecting on it quite a lot now, I think, going into the second book, thinking like how different I feel to going into the first book. I feel like I feel a lot more like a human being, I think. I think I was very stuck in ADHD mode, like going, doing all these things, achieving all the things. And I think actually over the last 6 months, I've worked more on being a human being, which has been nice.
I mean, it sounds like what you've achieved since you were diagnosed. And I suppose just briefly for the probably few people who don't know who you are in the community, can you briefly explain the diagnoses and where they came throughout your life?
Yeah. So I was diagnosed with both autism and ADHD when I was 24. So up until that point, through my teenage years, I was always misdiagnosed or diagnosed with generalized anxiety disorder, panic disorder, and anxiety-related depression. So that was sort of what everything was put down to. And then I was sort of stuck in cycles, basically, where I would have, I think probably a lot of people can relate to this, but essentially now looking back, I always have like 6 months of ADHD being at the forefront and doing everything and being bubbly and wanting to achieve everything, wanting to do all these things. And then I would have a crash and burn, which was probably it catching up with the autism and the autism going, we cannot do this, and have these big sort of like, I think looking back, burnouts, but what felt like mental health crises at the time. I would sort of dropped out of school, then had to like leave jobs, and then had to come home from traveling, and then was sort of stuck in this cycle. And then when lockdown happened, I think everyone had a bit more time to reflect, and I was sort of in the brain space of thinking, I don't think anxiety is actually what's going on here, because I'm doing everything that I'm told to do for anxiety, and I'm still stuck in this cycle of whatever I do, I always just go back to that black hole of burnout or low mood or whatever. And then was sort of in that headspace of thinking something else is going on here, but I don't know exactly what that is. And then had a sort of by chance conversation with a counsellor who just asked me the question, has it ever been looked into why you take things so literally? And my answer was, no, it hasn't, but I think I know what you're hinting at. And then that sort of led me to hyperfixating, as we do, on autism. And then that led me to ADHD. And then, I got my ADHD diagnosis first, because that one felt like a more tangible outcome, because I was in like not a very good place, and I was thinking, well, if I can get my diagnosis, maybe the medication will help me feel better. So I got that one first in October 2021, and then autism the following April, I think. So April 2022. So yeah, a couple of years ago now.
The misdiagnosis of an anxiety disorder sort of hit me quite then. I was misdiagnosed with GAD, generalized anxiety disorder, when I was 15, put on anti-anxiety. So many of us seem to have been. Why do you think that is? Why do you think so many people get misdiagnosed with an anxiety disorder?
When me and my mum have spoken quite a lot about this, because so I was with CAMS from 15 to 19, the Children and Adolescents Mental Health Service. That was where I got diagnosed with all of that fun stuff and put on antidepressants. And I look back really frustrated at being like, how was I sat there in front of a psychiatrist every week, a psychologist, a key worker, all of these people, and nobody once considered autism or ADHD? And my mum sort of counters slightly with, well, that's all they could see. The way that you were presenting, because you were so adamant, you were so heavily masking, I guess, by that point, you weren't presenting outwardly with anything other than these panic attacks, these, sobbing episodes, low mood. That was the only thing that was visible. So that's what they saw. So that's what they sort of gave you an answer for, which I think does make sense. I think it is still frustrating of well, did they not think to wonder why a 15-year-old girl was feeling that way, when from an outsider's perspective, there was nothing happening in my life that would cause someone to feel that overwhelmed and that anxious and that depressed. But yeah, I think probably a lot of us that maybe mask a lot of the more obvious signs of autism and ADHD, it sort of is so, I guess, held inside like a volcano, and the only explosions that come out are these panic attacks or whatever. So that's kind of what they see, and that's kind of what they, then diagnose. But I do think it's really, really common. Anxiety and depression are really big ones. I think a lot of people sort of struggle with bipolar misdiagnoses, BPD. I think, you hear a lot of stories. I think eating disorders as well are a really big one, because again, that's maybe a presentation that someone sees, the doctors see this person is restricting what they're eating, but they maybe don't step to think, well, what is causing them to, is it a control thing? Is it a sensory thing? Is it a textures thing? Is it an overwhelmed thing? So yeah, I think a lot of the time, maybe up until now, they've diagnosed those little spurts of that come out once we've hidden as much as we possibly can, rather than looking, well, what's behind all of this?
You mentioned masking there. It's a huge topic. So many of us mask. I think that looks differently to everyone. And your first book was called Unmasked. But if we go back in time and into your earlier years, were there different iterations of masking in your childhood?
Yeah, I think if you look back at photos of me from sort of school all the way up until sort of very recently, it's like a different human every year. And I think my way of trying to fit in or belong or survive was, I will turn myself into the version of myself that I think the people that are around me at this time want me to be. So I would it's actually quite cringy to look back now, but I would get literally the same haircut and the same hair colour as my friends had, or wear the same clothes that they were wearing. And I guess that's sort of a thing generally in teenage girls, that there's trends and patterns and stuff. But I would literally morph myself into the group of friends that I was trying to fit in with at that time. And I think, for me, I've always been very malleable, I guess, of just what can I do, or who can I be, or what can I look like that's going to make me have the best chance of fitting in. And I think some of that is conscious, and some of that when you're younger is slightly subconscious, that you just do it without even realizing that that's what you're doing. But yeah, I think visibly, definitely looking back at photos, it's wild how different I can go from year to year to year to year. Even the other day when they announced the Oasis reunion, I shared some photos on my stories of at peak indie Ellie, when I was going through my indie gig, Dark Fruits phase. And people were I can't believe that's you. People who are good friends with me now, I cannot believe that that's you, because I just look completely different. And I think, visibly, and probably interests and hobbies wise as well, I think I probably have latched onto interests that other people around me were interested in, which I probably wasn't really that interested in personally.
Are you going to try and get tickets for Oasis?
Yeah, it's going to be very stressful. I'm literally already arming myself up for the weekend. But there is actually fact of the day for people. There is actually a line that you can ring at Wembley for accessible tickets. And if you've got an access card, which you can get for being autistic or ADHD, you can phone that up and get a +1 carer ticket. So,
brilliant. I'll put a link to that in the description.
Yes.
Just to stay on masking for a second, because what you were saying there about changing who you are in order to please the people you're with. I mean, my accent changes all the time.
Yeah.
Less so now, but when I was younger, when I was around my school friends who were quite well-spoken, I would pronounce my T's and everything.
Yeah.
And then I was with a particular different set of friends, my voice would completely change. And it was very awkward sometimes when those groups met.
Yeah.
And there would be comments from one side saying, why are you putting that weird voice on? And I think so many people will relate to what you've just said, that kind of mirroring other people in order to be more palatable, to meet the taste of. And I suppose, what's the cost of that, do you think, to someone's self-esteem?
Pretty heavy. I think I am realising now how ingrained that is, that people pleasing, because I think when I first got diagnosed, I sort of had this like, I know who I am now. Like, this is me. I've figured it all out. Like, woohoo, I'm unmasked. Like, we can leave all that behind. And then I think actually looking back at a lot of the last 3 years, I almost just started masking as a different character rather than actually unmasking. Like, I thought that I was unmasking, but I was actually just masking as the person that I thought the neurodivergent community wanted me to be. Like, I guess with like, even like, I obviously like bright colours, dopamine dressing, but I think it almost became like this character of like, oh, Ellie Middleton, she wears bright clothes. Like, I always have my fidget toys, but it was almost this like I was wearing stuff for talks or videos that I would never wear in my normal life. And it was like, oh, well, maybe this isn't unmasking then, because I'm still maybe trying to be a different person, but that person is just slightly different from the person that I was pretending to be before I got diagnosed. And I think, so much of it runs so deep that you don't even realize that you're doing it. And I think it's, you don't really have much sense of who you are. That's one thing I really struggle with, like in therapy, is like, I really struggle to have a sense of who I actually am as a person, because that changes so much depending on who I'm with. And I've sort of identified like, I'm probably closest to Ellie, real Ellie, when I'm with like my brother, probably is the main person, or my family. But I just, like, it's not a conscious decision to not be that person with other people. I just can't be that person with other people. And I think it's like, I was actually saying recently that I think it's quite sad, because I actually prefer the Ellie when I'm just with my brother or with my family. Like, I can be quite funny and I can say things and be carefree and I can be a bit silly and I can have a nice time and be fun. And other people would actually probably like that version of Ellie more than the version that they get. But there's something, I guess, like a fear in you that is like, I can't be my real self, because if I'm my real self, then if they reject me, then that's personal. Whereas if I'm this, I don't know, person who's very careful about what they say, and I'm this very like controlled character, then if they reject that character, they're not rejecting me. So me's still safe. So I think it's really difficult to realize how deep that actually runs, and how many things it shows up in as well. Like, I think we think of it on like, I don't know, the big scale of masking and people pleasing, but it's like, sometimes it is so like, your interests could be that you've just picked those up because other people were into those, or like, I think we don't realize like how deep that actually runs a lot of the time. I think it's going to take a lot more undoing than I thought it was going to take.
You've just reminded me, I remember you said last time, on the one hand, a part of you wants to unmask, but on the other hand, unmasking is making you very vulnerable to R.S.D, because you're not making yourself more palatable to the other person, therefore you're increasing the chance of, so you've got that internal conflict. Do you think there are some situations where masking is a useful and a necessary tool to protect yourself?
I think so. And I think like definitely for a lot of like marginalized people as well, I think that's the case. Like, there's a lot of conversation with like the Black community, because maybe I can unmask and, I don't know, stim in a way, and I'm sort of a young, quite small white woman, so it's not that threatening if I'm doing something. Whereas if a 6'5" Black man is doing that same action that I'm doing, he can't unmask safely, because people are going to see that in a very different way to they see me doing that action. So I think a lot of different factors come into that, like necessity of masking, because it's like those people don't have the option of unmasking. But I think for all of us, I think like a lot of things, maybe I know that I sort of have to mask to get through it, but I'm going to be thankful that I did get through it, I guess. Like even as a content creator, like I'm always masking sort of to a level on screen. I think it's funny, like me and my friend Charlie talk about it quite often. When you're going back and editing my videos, I can sort of like see the mask almost like coming on and off. It's like you're in like talky mode, and then you have a breather and it's like it goes on and it comes back on. And I think, it's like, well, that's sort of masking to a level, but it's what I do for my job, and I want to create content, so it's kind of worth it for me to do that. And I think just for whole different reasons, it's not that we're like ever saying to anyone like you can never mask again, you've got to be completely unmasked all the time. I think it's just maybe being more like careful of, okay, when is it going to benefit me to use this, and when do I want to use this skill that I've learned, and when actually is it going to become exhausting and drain me and make me burnt out and all of the above.
When was the last time you felt truly unmasked, but in that moment you felt also deeply uncomfortable?
Ooh. I think a big one that sticks out is like I have been on quite a lot of solo holidays, and the airport, more coming home, always I find really, really difficult because, you know, airports just aren't fun anyway. But I think in the UK, you sort of have the safety of like my sunflower lanyard. Like I know that sort of hopefully if it works, people will accommodate me. And if I am in distress, they'll be there to look after me. Whereas like I was flying, like the big one that sticks out is flying back from Egypt. And there's like the language barrier, the noisiness of the airport, the systems just sort of like don't work in the same way. You're doing all of these random extra steps of security that you didn't know were going to happen. And I started having sort of like a bit of a shutdown, but then was like, this is so terrifying because I am a young woman on my own in an airport, and I don't really feel like I was crying, didn't really feel able to speak. I was like, that's such a vulnerable position for me to be in, which I think you don't really get hit with those moments often. But I think at that moment, I was like, I don't have it in me to mask right now. Like I'm just so overwhelmed, so drained. But in doing that, that's, you know, not a nice situation for me to be in, that I'm in a foreign country on my own in an airport where like, I guess the stakes are higher in terms of like, if you're not behaving in the right way in security or whatever it might be. I think there was that sudden moment of like, oh God, I'm actually like, this is not a nice feeling right now. Like I wish I could switch it back on and go back to like, just sort of not looking like anything's going on from the outside.
I was reflecting on that question, and just you talking then reminded me of a similar situation probably many of us have been in. Say you're around a dinner table and your energy disappears, and you've suddenly not got any energy to put on that mask.
Yeah.
And you're forced to be your truly 100% unmasked self, but you're trapped at a dinner table. And suddenly you're conscious of people thinking that you've gone awkward, or you're conscious of people thinking you've gone quiet. And it's such a contrast to you, the version of you that showed up an hour ago. Yeah. Do you relate to that at all?
Yeah, definitely. I think there's like, I can think of probably about a year ago now, I was dating somebody, and it was like the first time that I was meeting all of his friends, and it was, I think, a couple of the friends' birthdays, and it was like a barbecue and then going to different pubs and then going into town. And I'd been so happy with how like the first half of the day had gone, because I was like, oh, I've met all these people and they seem to like me, and like it's gone, you know, I'm having a really nice time, and this is a new group that I'm going to be a part of. And then it got to, I don't know, whatever time in the afternoon, evening, and I just felt that no, I'm empty now. And then it was like, oh, well, I don't know them really well enough for them to, you know, if I just go, then that's rude, and I don't want to like have this, I don't have it in me to have this full on explanation now, but then I also don't, and I think you're sort of like sat in that freeze mode of just like, I need to go now, but I don't know how to explain that I need to go, so I can't go either, so I'm just going to have to. I think it's a really weird feeling. It's actually sort of around that was one of the tips that I wrote in the book, is having like a code word or a code signal or something. So say you're going to that dinner party with your partner, you can sort of say to them, okay, when I need to go, I will tap you on the arm 3 times, and then your partner can be in charge of, we're going to have to get off because the parking meter's running out, or we're going to have to get back because the dog needs, I don't know, they can do the explaining and get the way out of it without you having to be able to really communicate it in that time. So I think that's like one of the really good tips that I've learned along the way that, I think is helpful in that situation. Because I think it is that, I think what's really difficult is you don't let people in because you don't want anyone to see you in that state. Like, if I am just blunt, rude, air quotes, Ellie, and I just stand up and walk away, I don't explain to anyone where I'm going, or I'm crying on the way out, or whatever it might be, then they're going to think bad of me. So you don't ever show them that side of you. But it's like, actually, to let people in, you have to show them that side of you, and then they'll be able to accept that side of you. And then, it's sort of like a self-fulfilling cycle, because if you never give someone the chance to respond well, or to respond nicely, or to respond with compassion and care to that version of you, then you never get that feedback to know that it's okay to do it again. So you're sort of stuck in that of like, I can never ever let anyone see me that way, or never behave that way, because you don't have any proof that it will go well.
Because the amount of parties I've left without saying goodbye, just because my social battery's gone from 100 to nothing quite suddenly. And then I felt really awkward, and I just don't have it in me to go up to people and say goodbye. And I just quietly leave, which is fine. But then the consequence of that is then I'm at home. And
then you're overthinking as well, thinking, they all hate me and I can never go again because they all think I'm rude.
Yeah. If I'm do you have any tips for someone in that situation who's at home overthinking, thinking everyone hates them because they left early?
I think, it sounds so simple and it never feels that simple. But I think just bite the bullet and just send the text, just say, sorry, I had to go, not feeling great, had a lovely night, see you soon. And I think that sounds so simple, but I am definitely the worst for, I think it's like a similar thing to when you don't text someone back and then you realize 4 days later that you haven't texted someone back, and then you know that you should just text them now and say, I'm so sorry, I completely forgot, but you feel bad, so you don't send the text, and then it gets to 4 weeks and you still haven't sent the text, so you're just like, I'm just going to never have to be able to speak to this person again because I've not acknowledged the fact that I've ignored them. I think it's the same thing of if you were to just send that text straight away, even though it feels uncomfortable in that moment, you've dealt with it then, and it's going to be fine. No one's going to come back and be like, I hate you because you didn't text me back for 4 days. They're going to go, okay, I get it, it's fine, don't worry, everyone's busy, I've done the same thing a million times, and then it's never thought about ever again. Whereas you sit there and you overthink it, and then I think I'm definitely really guilty of distancing myself, or just sort of cutting myself off from people because something like that's happened. There's not even been an argument or a disagreement or anything. It's just I have felt like I've left it too long to explain a situation and where I've not replied or whatever it might be. And then I'm like, oh, well, it's just gone now. So that's, we're just not really friends anymore. And I think I look back now, and I was actually thinking it the other day, a girl who I used to be close friends with when I was, I don't know, about 20, a picture popped up of another friend with her, and they were at a party together. And I was thinking, we never fell out. Why are we not we don't follow each other anymore? We're not friends anymore. And I was probably just a situation where I hadn't replied in 2 months, and then I felt awkward about it. So it just fizzled apart. So I think the tip is just send it. And 99% of people, I think, are never going to respond badly to you saying, sorry, I had to leave, not feeling great, or battery ran out, or whatever it might be. Because I think if you think of it the other way around, you always feel awkward to send it. But if someone sent me that text, I would never ever be like, well, that was rude. I'd never think, I'd just be like, oh yeah, of course, no worries. Do what you need to do.
Oh, it's like that internal contradiction of finding it really challenging and laborious to maintain friendships, but also then feeling quite lonely when I see a group of friends together out on holiday together, whatever. It's good advice though, just to bite the bullet and send that text message.
I think it's a lot easier said than done as well, but I would like to do that in a dream world. I'm not very good at actually doing it in action.
So I suppose an additional question to the first part of that is, when was the last time you felt truly 100% unmasked and felt accepted and liberated?
Ooh, I think definitely with my brother is a big one. I think we are both sort of in a similar journey of that unmasking, which is nice to be able to go through together. And we've always had very similar interests of we love going to the football, we love going to gigs. And I think actually those environments are sort of strangely really comforting and safe environments as someone who's like unmasking, because I think they were really comforting as someone who was masking, because it's really easy to fit in at a football game or at a gig because you just have to do what everyone else is doing. Like there's no eyes on you. You're not really being perceived in any way. You're just part of a crowd that are all cheering when something good happens, or booing when something bad happens, or getting angry at the ref when he makes a bad decision. And at a gig, you're just dancing and singing to the music. So I think they were really safe environments to be in as a masking person, because it's like, oh, this is so easy. I just have to follow what everyone else is doing. I don't have to like think about it. But I think equally, like, it's so nice and easy to unmask in those environments, because it's like, no one's watching me. I'm not being perceived here. Everyone's watching the band. We went to a gig on Saturday, and one of our favourite bands was like one of the quite early on support acts. It was like an outdoor day gig. One of our favourite band, the K's, were on quite early in the afternoon. So we went for that, and then we saw that, and we were having a good time. And then it started raining, and it was still probably, I think, 3 bands until the main like headline band were coming on. And we were sort of like, we could just go. We don't have to stay in this loud. We've seen our favourite band. We'd like to see the other band, but we're not that bothered. So we like went to see the band that we wanted to do. Both of us have my brother's been sober about 18 months now. I've done 2 months sober. So we didn't have a drink, didn't feel like we had to have a drink to be in the crowd. Saw the half an hour set of the band we wanted to see, got some food, went home, out of there, not stressed. I think that's like a really nice feeling of like, oh, I actually like enjoyed myself in that environment, which I love going to gigs, but they are very draining. It's loud, it's long, it's busy. There's people crushing into you. Whereas it's like, actually, I can do it in a way that suits. It's not embarrassing if I left early. I've got what I wanted out of it, and I think that's a big one. I think those sort of we're quite frequent of an early exit with my brother. But yeah, I think definitely with him is like where I'm most myself.
Yeah, that's amazing. I think it's good to normalise leaving gigs or theatre shows or whatever, a cinema halfway through. The problem I have, I think, is when you do that kind of thing, although it might be the best thing for you, it can often be quite confusing to other people who you're with and create a feeling of being misunderstood unless you articulate the process, what's going on in your head behind that decision. And I think being misunderstood is such a common theme in the community for a million reasons, which we could go into. But what I'm more interested in to know is, what do you think the toll someone has to pay for being misunderstood? And from your experience, how does that toll increase as they enter adulthood?
Yeah, I think so many of my friends who are also like late diagnosed or like neurodivergent become sort of like natural over times 100 explainers because of being so misunderstood for such, like, in so many different scenarios. I think I actually find it really interesting as like a speaker and as a writer and as a content creator. A lot of people compliment me on how well I explain things. And I'm like, well, yeah, I've had to learn to explain things really well because I've been misunderstood at every single opportunity of my whole entire life. But like one example is I use analogies quite a lot. And I love an analogy, and people will always be like, oh, that was really helpful. Like, thank you for using one that I've been using quite a lot recently. When I'm talking about the executive functions, I say that it's like air traffic control for your brain, because I'm like, in the same way that air traffic control makes sure that everything takes off at the right time and there's no crashes and everything's running smoothly, that's what your executive functionings are doing for your brain. And so often people are like, oh, thank you for like using that analogy. It's really made it make sense for me. And I think that's a learned skill of, okay, how can I say this in a way that this person has the least possible chance of misunderstanding, because we've been misunderstood so much. So I think in that way, I've almost like had a positive come from it, even though it's not very nice, but it's like, I actually now, have learned to really precisely communicate what I want to minimize that risk of being misunderstood, which is helpful to me now, which is not a very nice thing that I've had to learn how to do. But I think another big one, I don't know, for me, is if I'm misunderstood in any way now, it triggers me so much. And I think it's like, it's not just that misunderstanding, it's the fact that it then triggers all of those previous misunderstandings. Like, I hate it when somebody I don't know if there's like a disagreement or someone sort of like assumes that I have bad intentions or something like that, it like really sets me off. And I'm like, actually, it's not this misunderstanding that's bothering me that much. It's the fact that it's like number 800,000 of being misunderstood in time. So yeah, I think with age is an interesting one, because I think a lot of people say, don't they, like, oh, when you get to 30, you won't care what people think, or when you get to whatever age, like you know, that's the best time. Which I think, I don't know, I think is true and not true. Like, I think when you're a teenager or when you're like younger, everything feels like the end of the world, doesn't it? So every misunderstanding, you maybe feel a lot deeper. Whereas I think probably now I'm slightly getting towards, well, it's their issue. If they think I'm a bad person, then they're wrong. I'm not a bad person. To a certain extent, I think there's still like, I think a lot of us have a lot of, I guess, wounds from all of that sort of trauma beforehand. So I think, like, in an ideal world, it'd be nice to say, oh yeah, I don't care what people think anymore. If they misunderstand me, they misunderstand me. But in reality, it does still hurt, but I think maybe not to the extent that it used to when I was younger. But I guess that is from a whole array of things, I guess. Like, I think this journey career-wise has sort of forced me to get to a point of more self-acceptance, I guess, because it's like, well, I can't be taking everything to heart all of the time because I'm busy. I've got stuff to do. I've got conversations to have. So I think maybe moving towards that less of an impact, but probably not quite there yet.
Following on from what you said then, does your dual diagnosis, do they sort of pull you in different directions sometimes? We've had a few guests come on with AuDHD, and for one of them with the most illustrative of analogies said, it's like two siblings dragging each other across the room by their hair. And do you agree with that? How would you describe these two sectors of the brain colliding on a day-to-day basis?
I think that's a good analogy. Love an analogy. I think I have always felt as though there's I guess kind of like similar to the sibling thing, but I've always felt like one's in control at a time. Like when I sort of said about growing up, it was almost like I had 6 months of ADHD Ellie, and then autistic Ellie would like get caught up. And I felt like it sort of kind of goes in like periods, like seasons almost, of like I'll have a more ADHD. I know that's sort of ridiculous. They're both there all the time. But I seem to have seasons where one's more like at the forefront than the other. And yeah, I don't know. I think some things it's really frustrating because it's like I am setting myself up for stress or failure. Like a big one is like, with like today, for example, I've not really had the stress today, but a lot of the time I would like get to today and I would be like the autistic Ellie would be so stressed out because I'd be like, oh, I don't know what time I'm supposed to be there. I don't know what I'm supposed to do when I get there. I don't know, I don't have their number. I don't know who I'm supposed to ask for. I don't know if I'm meant to go inside reception or if I'm supposed to, and I'd be so stressed out. But it's because of my ADHD that I've not thought about any of those things until the morning of. So I would get really stressed that I don't have this information, but I've not remembered that I need to ask anyone for any of this information until the morning of. I think that really like frustrates me. So I've actually like sort of put into place now, because I've done that so many times where I've like woken up on the day or the day before stressed out and had this massive meltdown of like, I don't have all the information that I need, and I don't feel ready, and I don't have photos of the space, and I don't know what time I'm getting picked up, or all of, I don't know what time my train is, or all of these hundreds of things that you stress out about when you don't have all the information. But now I've actually said to my management, like, I won't remember to ask you for these things that I need, but I do need them, or else I will stress out to the max on the day. So they've now like automated a reminder to ask for those things on my behalf before, which is like the best thing ever. And sort of, I guess even before that, I've now made like an access rider that we send to anyone that I'm working with. So the first time that like a brand or whatever wants to work with me, they get all of the information about, this is everything that you might possibly need about how to, like what I might need from you, or, I might need this information ahead of time. I need an agenda. I need this. I might be direct. I need you to be direct with me. All of this stuff, they get that. So it's like, I think they're very clashing, and they set each other up for failure. My autism and ADHD, so I have to find ways of like bringing a third part, bringing the mum into the room to split the parents up, to split the siblings up, basically. I think for me, there's normally one that's more prominent at a time, but that's my most frustrating thing. Is like, or like I'll get really stressed out. The autistic side of me will get really stressed out if I can't find something. But then the ADHD side of me doesn't put things back where they belong, because I'm always in a rush and I'm always running late and just throwing stuff wherever it needs to be. So I think it's like stuff like that where it is just like two very opposite needs. And it's normally the ADHD that's causing more trouble for the autism. I think it's almost like that one's the sensible sibling and this is like the naughty, chaotic person that's just like, I don't care about the rules. I'm going to throw stuff everywhere. I'm going to leave stuff to the last minute. Like,
Why are some of us like that? Why this whole? I mean, I'm the same. If I've got a presentation preparing for a podcast, unless it's the night before or the train journey to the event, it's like dragging a bag of bricks behind me. I'm just unable to start the task.
Yeah,
I think, and I can't even imagine if the stress that would come if I had a corresponding part of my brain that was so craving the organization that is needed or required to do something in advance. So, and a fantastic illustration into the window of what it must be like to living with as an AuDHD person.
Yeah.
Last time you mentioned something fascinating. You said you had a 6-month pendulum of swinging from, I think you said depression, and then it would swing back to ambition and optimism. And it's been a year since you were last on. So I was just wondering if you had any experiences of that pendulum, and if it had cropped up and how.
Yeah, I think, so we recorded just before my first book came out. After that book launch period was like, it was obviously amazing. My first book coming out in the world. I'm so grateful that it happened. I loved having the events and meeting people, but it took it out of me big time. Like during like the couple of weeks of like the book launch, I was like ringing my mum on FaceTime, absolutely sobbing. I can remember saying, this is supposed to be the happiest time of my life and I cannot enjoy it because I'm exhausted. Like I was so burnt out. And when I'm burnt out, the main thing is, it's just from an outside perspective, if someone didn't know that I was autistic or ADHD, I present as if I am severely depressed, I would say. Like I'm just sobbing. I lose interest in everything. Like I struggle to do, like get in the shower, struggle to feed myself. Like I just, I have a really sort of like low time. And I think, it was I was really frustrated, I think, because it was that feeling of like, this is supposed to be the best time. I should be so happy. Like this is it. And I can't enjoy it because I'm just exhausted. So I think there was a big sort of pit of that in there. I think this year I sort of, got to the point where I was like, I can't keep doing this to myself. I'm the one that's taking on so much that gets me to those points of sobbing and not being able to enjoy it. And I can't keep doing this to myself. So I think this year I've had to make a very, very conscious effort to do a lot less. Like it has been very purposeful doing less. And I think I've probably felt the rewards of that I've not had as many big, like I don't think I've had I can't think of a big sort of like depression phase that I've had in that time. I think there's been obviously times when I've done too much and I've had a big sob and I've got overwhelmed. Like the most recent one was when I was recording the audiobook. Have you recorded your audiobook yet?
No, next week.
I don't want to put you off. For me, as someone that's autistic and ADHD, it's one of the most difficult things I have done. Maybe you're more like good for it than me because you spend a lot of time, like you're recording episodes and talking all the time. But for me, sitting in a room and talking all day, it's drained me so much. And that was another one where the theme is that I ring my mum and just, I can't do it anymore. I'm so fed up. I just can't do it. I just want everything to stop and leave me alone. But that was another one. But it was more of a couple of days that I was just exhausted after it, and then I was back. So I think there's still those fluctuations definitely still happen, and the burnout still happen. But I think with a lot of very sort of conscious saying no to things and doing less and doing things that I know make me feel better, like exercising more, going out for a walk, eating. I've eating a lot better than I definitely was this time last year. Like making a really conscious effort to look after myself has lessened the intensity of the lows, I think.
I was quite looking forward to recording my audiobook next week.
Yeah, sorry.
But you give me a dose of reality. You've done this twice before, so it's good to have an experienced person telling me what I'm in for. I'll have my mum on speed dial. We've got a fascinating couple of pages more of questions to go through, but first I want to find out what your ADHD item is. I'm desperate to know what's underneath that cloth. Way! It is... Well, I'll let you explain what it is.
Yeah.
What is it and why?
We have got fizzy bubblegum bottles. So the story behind it is when I was in sixth form was when like my mental health was worst. So I eventually ended up dropping out. But like in the period to that, like leading up to that, when I was really struggling to go to school, we sort of like got to a point where I would like go in for one lesson or I would go in for the morning and then I'd come home for the afternoon. And there was a sweet shop, like an old sweet shop in the town where I went to school. And Fizzy Blues were my favourite. So my mum used to go to the sweet shop and get me like a bag of Fizzy Blues and she'd put them in my blazer pocket. So she was like, if you just like have a Fizzy Blue like every 5 or 10 minutes and then once you get to the end of the packet, it'll be time to come home. So I guess it was that like treat of motivation of like, okay, if I just get through this thing, like it's going to be difficult, but I've got this nicety to add to it that's going to help motivate me to get through it. So yeah, I think it's always like a nice memory of like that I was able to get through something or to a certain extent that was quite tricky. But I think it's like a lesson that I've learned. Like I say quite a lot, it's like my ADHD is a toddler and I have to just give it what it wants. So if that means I have to like, I don't know, be a parent that's like, you know, role playing or promising a McDonald's on the way home or promising sweets or, you know, giving it that treat, a little bit of what it wants for it to give me back what I want in return. So yeah, Fizzy Blues are sort of like a visual representation of that for me.
I've just realised I've given you like a sealed version, which is really cruel. Do you want to open it and have one?
No, because then I'll end up eating the whole thing.
So the fizziness element, is that...
Yeah, I guess that's another one as well.
Like I don't know, a bald cola bottle have the same effect?
Yeah, I guess so. I think it was more just that like they were my favourite, so it was like the motivating factor. But then actually I think a lot of people do say about like sensory seeking, we go for like fizzy sweets or like salt and vinegar crisps and stuff like that. So I imagine that's probably a bit of it as well. But yeah, it was just like I can picture back to having like a little paper bag of them in my blazer pocket and just being like, if I just have one now, then I just get through it at 5-minute periods at a time and I'll get through the rest of the lesson. Fascinating.
Well, we'll put them on the shelf. You've made them really enticing, so we will struggle not to eat them in the future, but we'll try our best. Anyway, you like, maybe just under the Zumba t-shirt. Right, there's crisps as well. That was Kate Spicer's item for similar sort of stimulation reasons. Right, I want to do the agony aunt section, the ADHD agony aunt section, and I've called it the washing machine of woes. So the washing machine is my item because I always forget my clothes in the machine. Do you forget your clothes in the machine?
I think I've learned the hard way not to because I hate that smell of smelly washing if it's sat in the machine too much.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm on top of that now. But now that's the best thing about that I've moved back home, that I don't have to do my washing anymore. My washing's taken care of.
That's good. I need someone to do that for me. Yeah, that smell of mould is weekly occurrence. Okay, this week in the washing machine of woes, someone from Instagram who follows the show has asked, my daughter is 16 and she's having trouble making friends. It breaks my heart to say it, but she seems to just get upset or irritate those around her. And I think she's showing signs of autism. Is there anything I can tell her to make her feel better? Because I think she feels a bit broken.
Oh, that's a tough one. I feel like that was like, oh,
yeah, you could have that if you want to reread it.
You. Yeah, I can definitely relate to the daughter. I think I had a really, really tough time at school. One thing that always came up in conversations with me and my mum, like I've had this conversation so many times, is she would always say to me, like whenever it sort of like went wrong in a friendship situation or things went bad, she would be like, why do you always go for the popular girls? Like I think like looking back, my probably survival mechanism in masking was like, oh, well, if I just become friends with the popular people, then it'll be fine because everyone will like me then. I think it was almost like subconscious like draw to the safest place, because if you're in with the in gang, then you're in and you're safe. So I would always try and make friends with like the loud popular girls, and my mum would always be like, why do you always go for those people? Because you know how it ends up. They're not always nice people, and it always ends up like this. Why don't you just find some people who are more like you, like some more quiet friends or friends who are just more like you? And I think, I don't know, I probably didn't realize I was doing it at the time, but I think that was for me. It was like, I need to fit in. So I need to fit in with the popular, air quotes, popular people. Whereas I think actually, if I'd have just found people more like me who were, I don't know, maybe considered a little bit weird at school, maybe didn't have the easiest time themselves, but I still would have had somewhere to belong and a friend to go through it with, instead of always being in a group, out of a group, in a group, out of a group, and never ever finding anywhere to belong. If I'd have just been like, well, it's better to have a true friend who might not be as sort of like far up the popularity rankings, but they're still my friend, I probably would have had a much better time. So I would say like sort of, yeah, maybe just like that advice of, you don't have to be friends with everybody, or you don't have to be friends with the cool kids. Just focus on and it like quality over quantity as well. I think like if I'd have just settled for finding one friend that I could have been myself with, that could have belonged with, that would have loved me as I was, I would have had a much better time, I think, rather than doing what I was trying to do, which was like trying to please everybody, and in like the long run, not actually pleasing anybody and not pleasing myself either. So I'd say like, yeah, trying to focus on finding like a singular friend, I think is a big one. And also, I think one thing that's really difficult when you're like having a really hard time as a teenager and at school is like when everyone says like, oh, school's the best time in your life. Like, you don't know how lucky you have it. Like, wait until you're out in the adult world. Like, school's so like, they make out like school is this amazing time. And you're like, well, if this is as good as it gets, then I don't really want to go any further, to be honest, because this is awful. So I think just like, yeah, reminding her that it's actually, you know, most people look back at school and go, God, kids were awful, like the girls were awful. I never, you know, I don't think anybody looks, well, I don't know, maybe some people do, but I definitely don't look back and think, oh yeah, it was a wonderful time in my life. Like, I think, you know, it's just because school's bad, it does get better. And it a lot of people have that experience of struggling to fit in and belong. And it's not actually that everyone else is having an amazing time and loving every moment and you're the only one that's struggling. Like, it's quite a common experience to have a rough time. I think that like that age of like 16, 17, 18 is so difficult because there's like this pressure to suddenly like know who you are and become an adult and like make these life choices. And like, there's so much change going on. Like, I think looking back, that's a lot of what sort of all led to me dropping out of school. Was it like socially, it was awful. There was like this pressure to choose what I wanted to study at uni. I was having to like come to terms with the fact that I was about to move out and go to a different city and study, and there was all these decisions and all this change and all this pressure of like, you have to do well in these exams, it's going to shape the rest of your life. Like, it's a rough old time, is that time, and all of that at the time of like sort of like figuring out who you are and like growing into like sort of that gap between like child and adult. So I think, yeah, just the like empathy, I guess, and compassion of like, it's okay if it's a rough time. And then I guess practical advice would be like, yeah, focus on finding a friend that's more like you rather than trying to please everybody.
Yeah, it's brilliant advice. I think the younger people can hear that advice and adopt it, the better. The younger people can find their tribe and not pretend to be someone they're not to please a large group of people, because every year you do that, the effects of that compound and to create a more damaged person. And the older you are when you realize you've been doing this, you've been masking your entire life, the more challenging it's going to be to start making the fixes, the changes to make your life a little bit easier. So it's brilliant advice. Thank you very much. Do you think having ADHD and being autistic yourself, do you think that makes you more tolerant to other people who might exhibit what some people might consider to be frustrating traits of those conditions?
I think yes and no. I think there's this thing with a lot of neurodivergent people where it's like either, I guess it's like magnets a lot of the time, like either it's like perfect and you click amazingly and like you love them for all their quirks and they love you for all their quirks. Or I think sometimes that's like not spoken a lot because it's, I guess, not the nicest thing of the community, but sometimes people's traits rub each other up the wrong way. Like, I think a big one is like I'm autistic so I really, like, I might be late myself as an ADHD, but I really hate it when last minute plans change. But also I am frequently either late myself or I frequently cancel things because I don't feel up to it on the day or whatever. So it's like actually someone who, like, I would annoy myself as a friend because I'd be like, oh, I can't believe she's cancelled the plans at the last minute. Like, that's my whole day change. And that change would sort of stress me out. But I have to cancel things because I'm burnt out or I don't feel up to it, whatever it is. So I think sometimes like those needs I think we have more compassion for it because we know, I guess, like once the moment has passed, you have a lot more compassion for it. But sometimes in the moment that can really, throw you of like, oh, why is she cancelled or changed the plans, or why is she running late because we were supposed to meet at this time and now everything's wrong and da 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 da. So I think like generally, I guess we're probably more like compassionate and accepting because we know what it's like to not be understood and to be like sort of judged for certain things or have certain parts of you be disliked. But I think something that's like important to remember is like it doesn't make you a bad person if in the moment those things do. Like that's part of something that might trigger you or bother you or like set you off or I think yes and no, I think.
I think being able to recognize those traits, the similarities in others is so important because it gives you the empathy, particularly I think in romantic relationships. And I think that's why some relationships struggle where perhaps one partner's neurotypical, one person's neurodivergent, unless there's solid communication there and there's a willingness from the neurotypical person to learn and understand the ways of the neurodivergent, then I think that can be a danger zone. But when there's understanding and a willingness to learn, I think then the relationships can thrive. And off that, you've built a huge community online, hundreds of thousands of people. And I can't even imagine the DMs, the people you must meet in real life. Do you see a common theme in the turmoil that people come to you with in terms of feeling lost in themselves?
Yeah, I think a big one at the minute is like they're figuring it out maybe, or they're relating to people and then they just don't know, how do I get a diagnosis? How do I get answers? I think that's like the big one, is sort of having that realization but not knowing who to turn to or whether that's like accessing a diagnosis. But I think like support is a big one as well, of like, okay, I don't know where to, ask for help or get support in work or all of these things. I think like, I think practically a lot of people are lost in that they don't know where to turn. I think that's a really big one, and one that's really difficult because it's like there just isn't the support out there at the moment. And then I think sort of like similar to that is like one that we get, because obviously a big part of Unmasked was like wanting to create a community for people to make friends and find support. And I think that's a big thing over the last year, has been realizing that that's really I love the idea of that happening, but practically it's really difficult for me to actually run that as a business. Like I just can't be everywhere all the time. I really struggle to like work with people. Like I've tried hiring people and that sets me off so much because it's like someone's always reliant on you, and my demand avoidance is like, oh, I don't want to talk to anyone today, but I need to tell you what to do. And so I think a big thing that people are looking for is like that community. I think a lot of the time, most people who come to me, it's like they've had that light bulb moment, they've had that realization, and then it's like, where do I go from here? So where do I find friends, or where do I find support, or where do I get a diagnosis? I think that's the big one of like, the light bulb moment has happened, but how do I actually move forward with my life now, or make things easier for myself, or get support.
A big theme as well that crops up on this podcast is R.S.D. Have you made any steps since you were last on to manage your R.S.D? Has it cropped up much?
Yeah, I think it's always there, isn't it? I think I actually saw a video recently by a girl I know called Lana, who makes really great videos about autism and ADHD. And she was like doing like a skit about all the different ways that R.S.D shows up. And I think I watched it and I was like, oh my goodness, I hadn't even like thought of that. But like, I can't even remember the examples, but it was like similar to like what we were saying earlier about the sending the text when you've like, left the party early or you've not replied to someone's text or something. She was like saying things about like, oh, because of my R.S.D, I don't take my problem to somebody because it's like, oh, well, if I go to them with this, then they might sort of not give me the answer that I'm asking for, or they might not agree with me, or they might tell me that I'm in the wrong. So I just don't go to people with things. And like basically like all of the ways that we isolate ourselves. And I think that was like, oh God, I hadn't even realized that I do so much. Because I think when we talk about it a lot, it's like that feeling of like the rejection feeling. But I think I'd not really thought about almost like all of the things that I do to avoid getting to that point of even getting the chance of the rejection feeling happening full stop. Like I think I do a lot of that, of like keeping everyone at arm's length and being very sort of controlled with what I like, the relationships I have with people, I guess. I think, I've definitely sort of realized recently, actually, I really do, like I have a lot more friends than I did pre-diagnosis, but they're very controlled friendships where I don't see them that often, or it's mostly over like the internet, or I wouldn't like go to them if I was really upset, or all of those things. So I think, still definitely I think I probably don't have as many of the like that horrible like gut sinking feeling of like, oh God, everyone hates me, the world is going to end. But I think actually that's maybe because I've done all of the preventative measures to make sure I never get there in the first place. I think it's a really tricky one. I think we one of the tips in the book is a framework from Leanne, who has been on the podcast, I believe. And it's what I learned in her ADHD coaching training, and it's like a reframing rejection framework. So it's like questions to ask yourself of like, okay, what am I believing? What is the thought that I'm choosing to believe? So you think, I don't know, I forgot to text my friend back, so like she hates me and I'm never, like I'm a rubbish friend and I'm never going to have any friends and no one's ever going to like me. And it's like, okay, what are the consequences if I choose to believe that thought? So it's like, well, I'm going to distance myself from her. I might distance myself from other people because I feel like I'm a bad friend and everyone's going to hate me. I'm going to be sad. I'm going to feel rubbish. I'm going to all of the consequences of believing that thought. And then it's like, okay, what's the complete opposite of that thought that I am choosing to believe? So it's like, I am a good friend and I am loved. And then it's like, okay, well, what are the consequences of believing that thought? Well, I'll be more present in my relationships. I'll feel happier. Like I'll open up to people more. I will, feel better in myself. And then it's like sort of making that conscious decision of like, okay, well, which thought do I want to choose to believe then? And sort of like doing evidence for both of them as well. So what evidence do you have that everyone hates you? Probably quite little. It's probably more of a gut feeling. Whereas the evidence for I am a good friend and I am loved, you probably have a lot of that if you look for it. I think that's a helpful thing to, because it's anything but logical, isn't it? When you're in that moment, it's just like that panic and emotional state. So I think trying to like have that step in and have that breather and then be more logical about it definitely doesn't stop the feeling from happening, but I think it allows you to pull yourself out of that spiral a bit more, which I think is something that I'm trying to get better at. I think it's always difficult to sort of like, because that feeling is always going to be there and it's always going to show up and it's never going to, I feel as though that gut feeling will always be there, but it's then how I bring myself out of that. So I think it's difficult to measure because it's like, well, I'm still having that feeling, but it's like, actually, well, am I letting that ruin the rest of my day? Or am I able to go, right, okay, that's how it felt in the moment, but I could understand logically that that's not the case and then move forward. That's still a win, even though you still have to have like that gut feeling to start off with.
It's true, there's no evidence. If you leave the party early, no one's texted me or saying, you were rude. The texts don't come, but I guess it's a first step to try and alleviate that feeling. You said earlier, and you've said before, that you take things quite literally. That, I guess, plus perhaps being quite blunt in conversation, that must create confusion in conversation with romantic partners, with peers, colleagues. How does that confusion clash with your R.S.D?
Yeah, I think it's like similar to that feeling, like what we said about like being misunderstood, that it's like, oh God, this is not going how I want it to go. And this is, I think something that really upsets me or really, really gets to me is when somebody who I consider to know me, like sort of misunderstands or misinterprets my intentions, if they think that I've had a bad intention with doing something, that always really, really upsets me, because I like can understand if a stranger, you know, thinks that I've been rude or blunt, because I am quite blunt. And if they don't have that context of knowing where the bluntness comes from, then that's fine if they think that. But when it's somebody that I'm like, oh, but you know me, so you should know that my heart would never, like, I am the softest person in the world. You should know that I don't mean it in that way. That really bothers me. Like, I guess R.S.D, just everything. Like, I don't know, if I like snap at somebody because I'm like overstimulated or whatever, and then they maybe snap back in this, or they say like, oh, that was not very, you know, they take that in a bad way, and I'm like, oh, but you should know that I'm not actually being nasty to you. I just couldn't help it in that very moment. I couldn't control my tone, or I was just overstimulated. I think that's a really difficult one. But then I think it's even more difficult because you can like put yourself in, like, I think of like my mum is probably the person that experiences most of those snaps, because she's my support worker as well. So in a stressful work situation, she's the one that's there. And in a stressful home situation, it's normally a mum that's there. And so she is probably the one that gets most frequently those little snaps. And I think, well, it upsets me that she thinks, or if she thinks that I'm being nasty or whatever, but if I put myself in my mum's shoes and I was being snapped at, I wouldn't like that either. So I think it's really difficult, because you're like, oh, I can understand why you feel that way. You're not just going to have someone snap at you and then go, okay, that's great, like that's brilliant, and you're going to react to that. You're going to feel some kind of way with it. So it's a really, I think, communication is a really big thing, like after the fact, of being like, you know, sorry, I got a bit heated there, and learning to be more direct with. I think one thing that I'm really like conscious of, and asking other people to be more conscious of with me, is like remind me frequently that you love me or like me or care about me, and I will do the same for you. So then when those heated moments happen, it's easier to have, I guess, that evidence of like, oh no, she does love me. It's just a snap. It's just that I've been overstimulated or whatever. Because like my mum will say like all the time, she'll be like, oh, you know that we love you so much. You know that I'd do anything for you. And I'm like, yeah, I do know, but sometimes I just need you to remind me of that when everything feels a bit overwhelming. So yeah, I think that's a big one that I'm trying to get okay with, knowing that I need to ask for. Because I think in so many situations, like to ask a parent to tell you that they love you more there's guilt that comes with that, because it's almost like you're telling them they've not been a good enough parent, that you know it deeply. But then I think like in a friendship, that feels very intense, or in a romantic relationship, I think that would feel very like needy to say like, can you please tell me that you love me? So I think there's so many like awkward feelings that come with that. But I think, yeah, I'm, I guess, trialing in a family situation of being like, I just need to hear that sometimes. So it like getting used to like telling people that that's in the same way that I need an agenda before a meeting. I also need to be reminded of that I am loved and cared for and like supported. So I think, yeah, trying to get comfortable with asking for those things that feel slightly more uncomfortable to ask for.
I mean, there's a lot there. I mean, I snapped because I was overstimulated. There's a lot of empowerment just in that sentence. There's a lot of self-awareness just in that sentence. I saw a meme the other day and it said, I can't be held responsible for my actions when there's multiple noises happening at the same time. And it's funny, but it's hugely relatable. And going through your life, not recognizing that you get overstimulated and not understanding why you're having those snaps. I mean, that's the damage we're talking about.
Yeah.
Years and years of people not understanding why they're snapping. And you just saying, I snapped because I was overstimulated. That's awareness right there. And I think more and more people are having this realization. Imagine how many relationships have ended because of people not understanding that actually it's because there's overstimulation at play and it's not something personal.
I think it's both sides as well, because I think it's like the person on the other end, they're just like, well, why does this person always snap at me and raise their voice at me or get angry at me or whatever? But then I think you, as the snapper, you feel like I must be a horrible, like, look at me, I'm shouting at my mum, I'm shouting at my partner, I'm an awful person, I'm horrible. That like is just as awful for you, I think, as it is for the person that's probably on the receiving end of those like snaps as well. So yeah, I think with everything, I think so much of it is just like context is the sort of best thing that you can have.
Why are boundaries important to a person?
I think there's something that I think as a people pleaser and a masker, there's something that I've not happened for me very well. I guess it's that like protection of like, this is who I am and this is what I'm comfortable with. And that's where I end and like you finish as well. I guess it's like, I think as somebody who was always just trying to fit in and trying to people please and masking and mimicking and just that didn't exist, because it was like, oh, well, I just want everyone to like me, or I want to fit in somewhere, so I'll just do whatever anyone asks and I'll just say yes to everything and I'll, do it their way. And I think you don't even realize that there's an option, I think, a lot of the time, to be like, oh no, this is what works for me. This is like, that doesn't work for me. I think it's really difficult to learn to set them, but I think, they're very important in like energy, I think is a big one, but I think also like sense of self, because I think once you figure out what you're okay with and what you're not with, that is, I guess, molding that little sort of barrier around yourself. Is more like, oh, this is who I am, rather than I'm just whoever that person wants me to be and whatever that person wants me to do, or sort of changing depending on who I'm with. I think having that sense of self is really sort of important in, this is what's okay for me, this is what's not okay for me, this is what I'm willing to do, this is what I'm not willing to do. I think it's a difficult thing to figure out, but I think you almost get that like little, I think there's a lot of like fear in setting a boundary. Like you feel like when you've always been a people pleaser your whole life and you've always said yes to everything, to turn around and go, actually, that doesn't work for me, or actually, can we do it this way? Or actually, I don't know, can you drive to me rather than me coming to yours because I've got a lot on. There's a lot of fear of the rejection, I think, because it's like, if I'm setting a boundary, then it's easy that that's going to be rejected. Whereas if I just go along with it, and there's no fear of that. But I do think you actually then get the like little satisfaction. Like I think it's when you set a boundary and it's accepted, there is like, oh, like look at me, like I'm so powerful. I think it's a really nice a nice feeling.
Yeah, it's great advice. And I was going to ask what tips you would give to someone who wants to set boundaries, because I think the requirement to set boundaries is on a lot of people's list. It's kind of just that not understanding how to do it and trying to get over that fear of the consequences of standing up for yourself, which is really exposing yourself to criticism and probably some pushback, which is terrifying to many people in the community. So I suppose if there was a book called How to Set Boundaries, what would the first page say on a very basic summary?
I think a good one for ADHD is that I actually learned from Leanne, was like having them written down and in a visible place. Because I think that's another one with a lot of us, because of the way that our brains are so, one, easily excitable, and two, memory's not always a strong point. That you can, like, I've gone through such an iteration of rules since like when I've been self-employed, because I was like, right, I'm only going to do talks on this day and this day, and I'm only going to do 2 talks a month, and I'm going to finish work on this time, and I'm going to not work on Wednesdays. But then an exciting email comes in asking me to do a talk on a Wednesday, and I've already done 2 talks that month, and I go, oh yeah, of course, like, and then I'm like, oh, that was one of my boundaries. I've just forgotten that it existed, or I've brushed it aside because something more exciting's come in. So I think having them like firm and sort of, like when you're at school, it's like the SMART goals or whatever, and it's got to be like specific, measurable, achievable, whatever it is. I think using that sort of framework for your boundaries as well is like specific, because you can say, oh, I'm going to do less talks, but then you don't actually like what's less. Then less just happens, and then you surpass less, and then you're just doing just as many. Whereas it's like, no, I'm going to do 2 talks a month. Like having it be quite specific as a boundary, like a personal boundary. I think as well, having it somewhere where it's always in front of you, like have it stuck up on your wall in your office, have it on your lock screen, or even better, I think the best one for me has been like outsourcing the boundary. Like with my management, I can say to them, right, I don't want to do any more than this, or I don't want to do anything that's over this amount of work or under this fee or whatever it is. And then they can set that boundary for me without my excitable brain or people-pleasing brain going, oh no, just this once I'll do it for less, or just this once I'll squeeze it in because they really want to have me. If someone else can do that for you, I think that's really, really helpful. Because, I think we're so easily like forgetting or just wanting to. I think what's difficult as well with boundaries, something that I have felt like, especially sort of as someone has a, I guess, smaller battery generally as an autistic person, like I'm the only one that misses out if I set those boundaries. Like if I say, right, I am not, I don't know, for example, I could say, right, I'm not taking on any work that comes in, like unless I've got 7 days notice. So I'm only doing it if I've got 7 days notice. Because that could be, well, I know that that's good for me. Like I know that I need the time to process. I know that it's overwhelming and stressful if it's, so I could set the boundary of I'm only doing work if there's 7 days notice. And then the opportunity of my dreams could come in and they could go, right, but you need to be in London tomorrow morning. And then I'm like, oh, well, I really want to do that. So I think like it's only me that misses out then if I set that boundary. So I think that's a really difficult one to come to terms with, of like, no, like they'll just find someone else to fill in my dream job. I'm the one that misses out if I stick to the boundary. But then, so I think something that I definitely really like don't have the answer to is that flexibility of it. Because it's like, well, obviously I would want to say yes to it if it's my dream job tomorrow. So I'm going to be sad if I don't stick to the boundary, because I'm going to think, oh, well, I've let myself down. Or I'm going to be sad if I do stick to it because I'm going to have lost out on that opportunity. So I think that's something that's very challenging. But yeah, I think just working out what works for you and trying to be quite like specific with that. And I think trial and error as well is a big one that's not really talked about. Like I think, like you say, it's like, oh, I'm going to set boundaries. And it's like, well, how do I know what those boundaries are? Like, how do I know if two talks a month is my limit, or I can do more than that, or whatever it might be. So I think not being afraid to, like they don't have to be firm boundaries. You set them once and then you stick to them for the rest of your life. They're just like, I guess like a guide of what works for you and what doesn't work for you.
Yeah, no, it's great. It's one of the great lies we tell ourselves, isn't it? When that email comes in, can you do another talk in your case, or can we do this project? It's the great lie we tell ourselves that we can do it without getting burnt out. It's up there with this new notebook will solve all my problems.
And I'm definitely going to start going to the gym this time.
Just getting towards the end, the beginning of your TED talk, you listed contradictions of social dynamics that you had trouble balancing. Could you mention a couple of them now?
Yeah, I guess it's like the main one is always that thing of like too much but not enough. I think that's something that so many of us can relate to, where it's like too much in maybe like very loud, very expressive, very sort of enthusiastic, very excitable, very like bubbly and all of that stuff, but then not enough in not doing enough, or not finishing the project, or not getting the job done on time, or not replying to people's messages enough, or whatever it might be. I think that's the big one is like, we always feel too much but not enough. But I think it's kind of like the, I don't know if you've seen the Barbie movie when she does the big speech and it sort of went viral, but it was like about being a woman, whereas it was like you need to be soft but not too soft, and you need to be ambitious but not too ambitious. And I think it's always that, like, but not too, I think is just so present everywhere in society, because it's like, oh, dream big, but not too big, because then people will like criticize you for that as well. Or it's like, be firm with your boundaries. Oh, but don't be too firm, because then people will just think you're rude and that you're not doing enough to help other people. Or I do think there's just like that always like, but not too. And I think as somebody who, like, I guess just neurodivergent folks in general, it's when there's no rules for like, well, where's the scale here? Like, what two extremes am I supposed to be existing between? If there's a scale of like not enough to too much, where am I supposed to be here? Because it's always one or the other, and I never seem to be able to find that sweet spot right in like the middle between the two sides. I think they're just these unwritten rules, and it's always a contradiction. Really, you can't really ever win.
I did watch I put on the Barbie movie, but I lasted about 20 minutes. I was scrolling on my phone and I swapped channel. The unwritten rule book, you said, I think you went on to say that in your TED talk, you said other neurotypical people just seem to have this metaphorical rule book, which helped them understand these things that you couldn't get to grips with. Did that lead to resentment of being different, having to work so hard to understand something others know intrinsically?
Yeah, I think that, like, before knowing that I was autistic and ADHD, I think there's a real like mix up of different things. I think it's like sort of that, like, I guess, sadness of like, why can I never get it right? And then there's also like the beating yourself up for being like a failure. And then there's always, I guess it's like, I think there's always a big wonder before you figure out that you're neurodivergent of like, is everyone finding it this difficult or is it just me? Like, is everyone behind the scenes having such a hard time and trying to figure it out, or do they all just like know it sort of naturally? So I think there's a lot of confusion when you don't know. And then I think once you are diagnosed, I think it's sort of the like double-sided coin of like, there's that feeling of like, oh, I'm autistic or I'm ADHD, so that's why I'm that way, which is like, there's the relief and the happiness in that. And like, oh, it's not that I'm a bad person, it's that, you know, my brain works differently. But then I think the other side of that coin is, oh, it's because I'm autistic and ADHD and that's why I'm that way. And therefore that's going to be the way that I am for the rest of my life and always. So I think like, it's really, I think you can sort of like flip between the two of like, there's a real validation that comes with like, oh, it's, you know, I'm not a bitch. It's just that I'm autistic. So people have misunderstood me, that I'm quite blunt and they think that I'm being rude. So it's like, oh, okay, it's just that I'm autistic, then that's why. Then it's like, oh, well, I'm always going to be autistic. So people are always going to misunderstand me and they're always going to think I'm a bitch and that's going to go on forever, which I think is a really like difficult thing of like, you can like from the same phrase, just said slightly differently, there's like massive validation, acceptance, like that feeling of being seen and heard. But then the other side is like, actually that means that it's always going to be this way. And people are always going to misunderstand me, or people are always going to, like, this is always going to be more challenging for me. And yeah, I think it's, I think people talk a lot about the grief that comes with diagnosis of like looking backwards of like what could have been if I was diagnosed earlier. But I think actually there's quite a lot of grief looking forwards that comes up as well of like, okay, when I thought that it was anxiety, there was always this hope of like, one day I'll find the perfect antidepressant or I'll find the perfect type of therapy and I'll be fine and I'll be a perfectly functioning human being and my anxiety will have been left behind. Whereas when you learn that actually it's ADHD and autism, there's no fix for that. It's never going to go away one day. Like that's always going to be there with you. And I think that's something that we don't talk about that much, is like the forward grief as well as the backward grief.
That's the first time I've heard it framed in that way. And it makes a lot of sense, because you get diagnosed with anything medically and your brain just goes, all right, well, what do I take to fix that?
Yeah.
And you get diagnosed with autism and there's no pill, right? There's no quick fix. It's just, I mean, it's acceptance and understanding, and people like you to listen to and advocating for other people who are living with autism. And thank you for the amazing work you're doing. I mean, it's truly inspiring to see the growth and the work that you're doing. It's been a year since you were last on, and it's, you know, inspiration to see how far you've come. We've got a new segment which we're closing with, and it's in essence, it's a letter from the previous guest, although this is the first time we've done it. So it's actually a letter from myself, my producer, and the cameraman. But in all future episodes, it will be from the previous guest. So the next episode will be your questions. But we're going to deliver you a letter.
Okay.
And if by magic I've got the letter here, I'm going to pass it to you.
Thank you.
This week, this is from me, my producer, and my cameraman.
Amazing. It's like Christmas. 3 rules to live by. Never have regrets, because at some point those regrets were what you wanted at the time and were the right thing to do given your circumstances. I think that's a really big one, like especially with like a late diagnosis. I think you look back and are just like the people-pleasing side of things. I think so many things that you've done, and it's like, actually that's what I had to do at that time to get through. So it's a good one. What you perceive to be your biggest weakness when you were younger will turn out to be your biggest strength. So definitely a good one for busy brains. It's better to have 2 really good mates rather than 20 crap ones. That's what I said earlier.
It is what you said, yeah. It's like
we're all on the same wavelength.
Luke's been writing behind the camera quickly as you were saying.
I do like there's very good rules to live by. I think if I could have had this like time travelled to open as a 15, 16-year-old, would have been a very much happier one.
Yeah, it's almost quite Instagram quote-worthy stuff. It's very useful. From myself, producer and cameraman.
Thank you.
Today's been absolutely fascinating and incredibly helpful, Ellie. So thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
What's the most impulsive thing you've ever done?
Ooh, I actually don't know. well, I think we said this before, lots of these are very impulsive, lots of impulsive tattoos. I also, when I went to do seasons abroad, I did that on like a month's notice. So I was working in a branch of Santander and just handed my notice in, and then a month later went around the world for 2 years.
God, was that scary?
Yeah, probably. But also I think it was just very exciting and something that I can remember one of the women that I worked with in the branch, she was lovely, but she had been working in the same branch in the same bank for I think it was like 25 years, and in like the same town, the same like job, doing the same thing. And I can just remember being like, I can't do that. That can't be me. Because I think at that point, like I dropped out of school, didn't have A-levels, didn't have a degree. My options were quite limited of like what I could do and go into. So I was sort of like, I'd got into that job and was quite happy with it. But then I was like, oh God, this is it. Like this can't be it. I was like, no, I need to get out of here. So yeah, very impulsive, but like definitely happy that I did it.
Have you got your phone on you?
I do, it's over there.
How many unread emails have you got?
Oh God, you don't want to know.
Let's see who wins. I've got 2,890.
I could cheat and show you my work one, but that's like managed by my support worker. So they go through and get to zero. My actual like one that's got all spammy stuff in it, it just says 1,000 plus. So 1,000. I don't know. 1,000 plus, but yeah. I think when I've done it on a computer recently, it's more like 4,000 and something.
Just get another email account and forget about those ones.
Yeah.
What about WhatsApps? How many like unread WhatsApps have you got?
96.
96. So you beat me on that one. I've got 20.
And I'm not in like group chats either.
Yeah.
Like that, because that's all like conversations.
Screenshots. How many screenshots have you got?
Too many. 3,074.
I got 570. So that's pretty
too many.
Why do we forget to look at them? Do you forget to look at them?
Yeah, all the time. Do you know, the one time when I actually go through my camera roll is when I'm on a plane, when you've got nothing else to do. That's the only time when I can just go through and delete so many old screenshots and photos. Yeah.
What about reusable shopping bags? Do you forget those? Always buying those?
I think I've actually got better at that because I'm just a Yorkshire girl and very stingy, and I hate having to buy them. So I do generally try and just put a load in my car. Like I'll just put loads in one day and then I'll like gradually use them all up. Yeah. So I've got better at that. And I just generally carry a tote. Like my bag that I carry is like quite big. So normally if I'm just getting a few things, it'll just go in there. And that's probably a coping mechanism to not have to buy bags for life. I just carry them around with me all the time.
What about domains? How many domains have you got?
I've got unmasked, which is in use. And then I think there's 2 that I started and then never did anything about.
Yeah. Do you do like health kicks? Do you buy supplements and stuff on a health kick? Again,
I think my stingy, I don't know if it's autistic or Yorkshire or combination of 2 nature, means that I will... If I've opened something or if I've bought something, I will use it up because I'm stingy basically. So I think the impulse happens where I probably won't buy it again once I've finished it, but I will finish them off because I have to finish them off because I've started them and I've bought them.